The room smelled like recycled air and old fear. Sergeant Dara Osi had been sitting in it for 11 hours. She knew because she'd counted the ceiling tiles twice, then counted the rivets in the door, then started on the tiles again. The chair was the kind that was hard on purpose. The light was the kind that made everything look like a confession already given. She didn't fidget. They were watching for that. The man who came in at hour 11 wore a coalition uniform, with the rank clusters of a full colonel. But he carried his coffee cup in his left hand when the personnel file she'd memorized said he was right-handed, and he set it on the table with the handle facing away from him, which nobody does. And he sat down across from her, like a man settling into furniture he owned, rather than a chair he'd borrowed for 30 minutes of administrative procedure. Osi watched all of this and said nothing. Sergeant. He opened a thin folder that she strongly suspected was empty. You were recovered from the surface of Karet IFES approximately 72 hours ago. You were the sole survivor of Firebase Oduya. Is that correct? That's correct, sir. You were also, according to our initial bioscan, clean. No assimilation markers, no neural grafts, no secondary nervous tissue. He looked up at her. His eyes were the right color, which makes your report somewhat difficult to process. I imagine it does. Walk me through it again. She had walked through it 4 times already, once for the medical team, once for a pair of junior intelligence officers who'd looked increasingly pale, once for a recording device with no human in the room at all, and once for a general who had listened with her hands folded on the table and then left without speaking. Each time Dara had told it the same way. Not because she was reading from a script, because it had happened the way it happened, and facts didn't shift just because the audience was uncomfortable. Fisaduya, she said. 41 personnel. We'd been on Karet Fee for 6 weeks running perimeter scans on the cave network in Grid Sector 9. Command thought the Veth had abandoned the subsurface tunnels when they pulled back from the northern continent. Command was wrong. The colonel made a small sound that might have been acknowledgement. The Veth didn't retreat from the tunnels. They went deeper. They built something down there. We still don't have a word for it in any human language that I know of, but I've been trying to think of one since I got back. The closest I can get is a chorus. It's not a hive in the way people imagine hives. It's not thousands of separate things following one signal. It's more like one vast thing that experiences itself as thousands. Each node thinks. Each node feels. But the feeling is shared instantly across all nodes. The way your left hand knows what your right hand is doing without you having to think about it. You learn this how? I was inside it. Silence. Outside the room, somewhere down a long corridor, something mechanical cycled on and then off. The colonel's coffee sat untouched. He was looking at her with an expression she was used to seeing on the faces of people who were working hard to decide whether they were talking to a person or a problem. She'd seen that expression a lot in the last 72 hours. Walk me through the contact event, he said. We were running a night survey on the eastern ridge. Myself, Corporal Taeyang Shin, and Private First Class Amara Abara. The Veth came up through the floor. Not through a tunnel. Through the floor. Through solid rock. She paused. I've thought about that part a lot. What it means for our containment assumptions. What it means for any defensive position we've ever built on any contested world. Contact event. There were 7 of them initially, then more. They didn't make sound. The Veth don't vocalize the way we do. What they do instead is... It's hard to describe without it sounding like I've lost my mind. Take your time. She looked at her hands on the table. Steady. They'd always been steady, even in the field, even under fire, even in the worst of it. She was not a person who shook. They transmit, not sound, not exactly light, something in between. A frequency that interfaces directly with certain structures in the human brain. Structures that, as far as we knew before Karet IV, had no function we could identify. Vestigial, some biologists thought. Left over from something evolutionary we'd moved past. She looked up. They're not vestigial. The Veth know what they're for. They built the chorus on the same architecture. You're saying the Veth can access human neural tissue. I'm saying they were doing it to Shin and Abara before I understood what was happening. It's not violent. That's the thing that's hardest to explain to people who haven't experienced it. It doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like. She searched for the word, like being listened to very carefully by something with infinite patience and zero malice. The Veth aren't cruel. Cruelty requires the understanding of suffering as a negative experience, and the Veth don't experience suffering, not individually. They experience interruption, discontinuity. Those are the things they avoid. And Shin and Abara, were assimilated within approximately 4 minutes of first contact. I know that sounds fast. I know how it sounds. But I watched it. One moment Shin was trying to get a shot off, and the next he was, still, completely still. And then he looked at me the way you look at someone you've known for a long time, with this enormous calm, and he said, "It's all right, Dara. You don't have to be afraid." She stopped. "And you ran," the colonel said. "I ran." There was nothing shameful in the word. She had run because running was correct. Because dead soldiers don't file reports, and reports were the only weapon she had left. She had run through 3 kilometers of cave tunnel in the dark, using only her suit's inertial compass, which was wrong by about 12 degrees. So she'd run through closer to 4.5 kilometers by the time she surfaced through a fissure on the northern face of the ridge. She'd run with the sound of the chorus behind her, not in her ears but under them, in the bone behind her jaw and in the soles of her feet, a frequency that wanted to be kind to her, that wanted to absorb her the way the ocean absorbs a stone, gently and completely, and without any awareness that the stone might object. The night air on Karadafi tasted like iron and something floral that had no equivalent on Earth. She had pressed her back against the ridge face and made herself breathe, in through the nose, count 4, out through the mouth, count 4, which was a thing her mother had taught her when she was 8 years old and afraid of thunderstorms, and which she had used approximately 10,000 times since then in situations her mother had not been envisioning when she taught it. She had made it to the emergency beacon 6 hours later. She did not tell the colonel about the breathing. Some things were not for reports. The 41 personnel at Firebase Oduya, the colonel said. All assimilated? All assimilated. Within, I'd estimate, 18 hours of initial contact. The Veth moved through the base systematically. They didn't destroy anything. They didn't steal anything, they just. She opened her hands, joined everyone. And the assimilated personnel. Are they aware? Are they themselves? She took a moment with this question. They're both, she said. That's the horror of it, if you want to call it horror, which maybe isn't the right word. The people in the chorus are still there. Shin is still in there. He still has his memories, his personality, his sense of humor, which was terrible. But those things exist inside a larger context now, the way a song exists inside an orchestra. The song is still the song, but it's part of something bigger, and the bigger thing makes the decisions. And the bigger thing is planning to do to this sector what it did to Firebase Oduya. She said it flat without emphasis, because the facts didn't need her voice to make them land. I don't know the full scope. I don't know the timeline. What I know is what I pulled from contact. 2 seconds of the chorus is enough for information transfer in both directions, and I was near it for 6 hours before I got clear. What I know is that the Veth don't see this as conquest. They see it as completion. They're not trying to win a war. They're trying to finish a project that they think has been interrupted. What project? Use. She met his eyes. They think we're a chorus that hasn't found itself yet. They think we're 40 billion lonely notes that don't know how to become music. And they are trying, with genuine goodwill, to help us. The colonel was quiet for a long time. Outside, the mechanical sounds cycled again. Somewhere further away, someone was walking fast down a corridor, their footsteps fading quickly to nothing. Sergeant Osi. The colonel folded his hands on the empty folder. You were exposed to a Veth transmission event for a period of, you said, 6 hours, approximately. Our initial bioscan found no assimilation markers. I know. That is, according to everything we understand about Veth contact, not possible. I know that too. He leaned forward very slightly. How? She'd been waiting for this. Not with dread, more with the specific patience of someone who has loaded a weapon and is waiting for the right moment to fire it. She reached into her jacket pocket and set a small object on the table between them. It was a piece of cave rock, dark and shot through with a crystalline mineral that caught the room's harsh light and scattered it in ways that made the walls seem briefly warm. She'd picked it up somewhere in the tunnel. Without thinking, the way you pick up things when you're moving fast and your hands need something to do. You know what the Veth are most interested in, she said. Not our bodies, not our memories, not even our emotions, though those fascinate them. What they're most interested in is our resistance, not as a flaw to be corrected, as a phenomenon to be understood. The fact that we are 40 billion separate beings, and have never once, in all of our history, merged into a single consciousness despite the obvious computational advantages. They find that extraordinary. They've been watching us for, as best I can translate the timescale, about 9,000 years. They've been watching us for 9,000 years. And they still can't figure out why we don't just, she made a gesture, collapse into each other. Why we insist on being separate. Why we experience loneliness and still choose it over absorption. It's the single most confounding thing about us from their perspective. And, from your perspective. She looked at the rock. From my perspective, she said, it's the only thing that saved me. She had not been assimilated because she had not been alone. That was the simplest way to say it, though it was not simple at all. In the 6 hours she spent near the chorus, bleeding out a cut above her left ear and breathing recycled suit air, and counting her heartbeats to stay awake, she had been alone in every physical sense. No other human beings in proximity, no communication signal, no contact with anything outside her own skin. But she had been with her mother, who was 7,000 light-years away in a 2-room apartment in Accra. She had been with Corporal Shin. Not the Shin who was now part of the chorus, but the Shin of 3 weeks prior who had made a spectacularly terrible joke about nutrient paste and laughed so hard at his own joke that he'd choked on his coffee. She'd replayed that memory approximately 40 times in those 6 hours. It made her almost smile. It made her firmly and without drama herself. She had been with Private Ibarra, who collected pressed flowers in a battered notebook she kept in her chest pocket, and who had, 2 days before the contact event, shown Osi a particularly fine specimen of whatever Caradives biologists were calling the local equivalent of a violet, and said, "Do you think anyone will name it after me if I'm the one who documented it?" And Osi had said, "Ibarra, I think you should aim higher than a violet." And Ibarra had grinned and said, "Fair point." She had been with all of it. And all of it had been loud enough that the chorus couldn't find an edge to grip. The Veth can absorb people who are connected to other people through proximity and communication, she said. They've been doing it for millions of years, and it always works. What they've never encountered, what they genuinely didn't anticipate, from what I can reconstruct of those 6 hours, is that humans maintain connection through time, through memory, through story. We carry each other around. A soldier alone in a cave is never alone, because she's got 40 years of other people stacked up inside her, and every one of them is shouting. She picked up the rock and turned it in her fingers. The chorus tried for 6 hours to find an entrance, and then it stopped. Because it couldn't locate the edge of me. It couldn't find where I ended and the people I carry began. And the Veth, they're not cruel, like I said, and they're not stupid. And when something doesn't work, they don't keep doing it. They moved on. The colonel was very still. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that the single most effective defense against Veth assimilation is human connection. I'm telling you it's the only one that worked on me. I'm not a scientist. I can't give you a paper on the mechanism. I can tell you that for 6 hours a species that has absorbed every other conscious organism it has ever encountered could not absorb one human woman, because she wouldn't stop thinking about people she loves." She set the rock back on the table. "Make of that what you will." The colonel stood up. It was a slow movement, deliberate, and when he reached his full height, he was standing in the posture of a man who has made a decision. Or perhaps in the posture of a man who has always already made it, who has been waiting for the conversation to arrive at the point where the posture could be revealed. He said, "You know, don't you?" Osi said, "I've known since you set your coffee down." A pause. "How long have you been in the chorus?" The thing that had been wearing the colonel's face for what she estimated was between 14 and 18 hours looked at her, with the colonel's eyes, and in the colonel's voice said, "Since the night before your recovery." Colonel Abramescu was alone. He'd sent his aide home. He was working late. A small pause. "He's well. He's still there. He's quite comfortable." "I believe you. This doesn't have to be adversarial, Sergeant. You understand that better than most. You've seen what the chorus is. You know it isn't. I know it isn't malicious. I know you believe you're offering something good." She hadn't moved. Her hands were still on the table. "I also know you've been in this room for 40 minutes trying to find where I end and the people I carry begin, and you can't." The colonel's face was quiet. "We've had your testimony," it said. "The recording. Command will act on the orbital recommendation within the hour. The strike will neutralize the cave network, the firebase, and approximately 412 assimilated coalition personnel," she said. "Plus my people. Plus Shin. Plus Ibarra with her violets. Plus the chorus nodes in that location, yes. We know you understand. We know you know this was a possible outcome. We wanted you to know so that I'd negotiate." The thing with the colonel's face said nothing. Osi nodded slowly, the way you nod when a thing you expected arrives on schedule. "You made a mistake," she said, "Sergeant. You told me Abramescu was alone, that he'd sent his aide home. She tilted her head. Commander's log, Carat 5 station, submitted at 0300 this morning. 1 hour before Abramescu would have been absorbed, signed and verified by Abramescu himself. Full station communications restored. Detailing the Veth contact event, the assimilation of Firebase Oduya, and a complete acoustic profile of the chorus frequency, including defensive countermeasures derived from my field report. She smiled, very small, very specific. He wasn't alone when I thought he was alone. I was wrong about the timeline, which means the aide got the log, which means command already has everything. She stood up. The orbital recommendation has already been counter-recommended. The strike is already stood down. Coalition science teams are already being briefed on the acoustic profile. We're not blowing up my people, and we're not blowing up Shin or Ibarra or the 412. She picked up the piece of cave rock. What we're doing instead is figuring out a way to have a conversation. With the chorus. Like adults. The colonel's face looked at her with something she could only describe as confusion. Genuine, deep. The confusion of an intelligence that has never once in its 9,000-year history encountered a situation it couldn't resolve by absorption, now encountering one. You did all of this, it said slowly, while sitting in this room, for 11 hours, 14. I was here 3 hours before you showed up. She put the rock in her pocket. I spent the first 3, drafting the log, and the counter-recommendation, and making sure they went out through the right channels. The last 11 I spent waiting for you to tell me something that proved you'd been in the chorus long enough to know things you shouldn't. You used yourself as bait. I used myself as a debrief subject. Which is what I was. Which is what I am. She walked to the door and stopped with her hand on it. I want you to tell the chorus something for me. The colonel's face waited. We're not lonely notes that don't know how to be music, she said. We know exactly how to be music. We've been doing it for as long as we've existed. In families, in cities, in armies, in stories, in the things we make and the things we remember. We're music that chose to be made of separate instruments, and we're not confused about it, and we're not looking to be corrected. She opened the door. We're going to send a delegation. Real one, with scientists and diplomats, and probably some people from the fields of music and literature. Because I think that's actually what this is going to require. And the chorus is going to have to sit with the possibility that some things genuinely want to stay themselves. She popped in the doorway. Tell Shin, I said, his jokes are still terrible. Tell Ibarra the violet thing. Someone's going to name it after her. I'm going to personally make sure of that. She walked out into the corridor, into the recycled air and the hum of the station's life support and the sound of boots on metal grating, into a world full of separate, insistent, connected, irresolvable human beings who were, each of them, hauling the weight of everyone they'd ever loved like a beacon too bright for anything to approach. Behind her, the room was quiet. In the colonel's chair, in the colonel's body, with the colonel's eyes, something old and enormous and genuinely good sat with a confusion it had never felt before, and tried, carefully and without any template to work from, to understand what it meant to want to stay yourself. It was a slow process. The chorus had time. What it didn't have, what it was only beginning to understand it had never had and might never acquire, was the particular human capacity for longing towards something irreducibly other. The desire not to become the thing you love, but to stand next to it, separate and warm, and know that it exists. The station hummed. Someone far down the corridor laughed at something. The laugh was brief and specific and entirely its own, and it did not echo into anything larger. The chorus listened to this for a long time. In a 2-room apartment 7,000 light-years away, a woman who did not know her daughter was alive was making tea and listening to the rain, which on that particular continent in that particular season came down in long, slow curtains that smelled like the ocean. Somewhere in the cave network below a ridge on Carat V, 41 people who had been Firebase Oduya were experiencing, through shared senses distributed across a vast and ancient intelligence, the concept of tea, of rain, of a mother who doesn't know yet. Corporal Taeyong Shin, who was still Shin, who was also more than Shin, felt something move through him that the chorus had no word for. The chorus found to its considerable surprise that it wanted to. It transmitted a query upward through its own architecture, through the vast lateral structures of shared feeling that had never needed to ask this question before. The functional equivalent of, what is this? The answer that came back, from 9,000 years of accumulated contact with species that had come peacefully into the whole, was silence. None of them had felt it either. Shin thought, Her name was Dara. He thought she used to count ceiling tiles when she was nervous, and she thought nobody noticed. He thought. She noticed my coffee, and she ran 4.5 kilometers through the dark, and she sat in a room for 14 hours and she got all of us out. He thought. I knew she would. Private First Class Amara Abara, who was still Abara, who was also more than Abara, thought about a pressed flower in a notebook in a chest pocket that was currently distributed across a dozen Veth nodes below a ridge on an alien world. She thought about the specific quality of light on Karat Phi in the hour before dusk, which nobody back home would believe unless you showed them a picture. She thought about the way the local atmosphere made the horizon look smeared, purple and orange, and an in-between color that had no Earth name. She thought, I'm going to name it after myself. The chorus absorbed this intention without understanding it. It held the intention anyway, carefully, the way you hold something that might be fragile, and might be a stone, and you're not yet sure which, because either way it deserves attention. Sergeant Dara Osti walked through the station to the communications bay, where a tech she didn't know was running a signal sweep on a frequency she'd specified in her log that morning. The tech looked up when she came in. Sergeant, got a lock on that acoustic profile. It's something else, ma'am. Never seen anything like it. Does it translate? Partially. It's structured, layered, like the tech paused, reaching, like music, kind of. But also like a lot of people talking at once. Except they're all saying the same thing. What are they saying? The tech looked at her monitor and then back at Osi. Best interpretation we've got is, we are here, just that, over and over. We are here. Osi stood at the edge of the signal display and watched the chorus move across the readout in long, slow waves that looked, she thought, a little like rain. Tell them we are too, she said. She put her hand in her pocket and found the cave rock, dark and cold and shot through with light. She held on to it. She breathed in. She counted 4. She breathed out. She counted 4. Outside the station, around the station, above and below it, space was doing what space does. Being enormous and cold and full of distances that break the mind when you think about them too directly. In the middle of all of that enormity, small and warm and absolutely definite, the station broadcast a signal on the frequency of the chorus. It said, we are here. It said, we are 40 billion separate, insistent, irreducible things, and we are here. It said, this is what we sound like. The chorus, in the tunnels below a ridge on a world very far away, heard this and did something it had not done in 9,000 years of expansion across 100 absorbed species spanning a dozen star systems. It waited. It listened. It did not know yet what this meant or what would come of it. It did not know whether the negotiation would work, whether the delegation would arrive, whether the word that was being invented right now, in real time for the thing Shin had felt, would ever have a shape that could be transmitted. It did not know whether two kinds of consciousness this different could find a way to exist in proximity without one of them eventually consuming the other. But it waited, and the station hummed, and somewhere in the corridor, someone laughed again. The same person or a different person, it didn't matter. The laugh was its own thing either way, and the sound moved down the metal walls and didn't become anything larger and didn't need to. Dara Ose stood at the communications console with a piece of cave rock in her hand, and her mother 7,000 light-years away making tea in the rain, and she was, firmly and without drama, exactly herself. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. That was enough.